There was a time when his voice was everywhere. It echoed through packed clubs, television screens, movie theaters, and living rooms across America. People laughed, danced, replayed the same songs again and again. The sound felt endless, unstoppable. Then one day it stopped. No final tour, no farewell show, no long goodbye, just silence. In the early days of hip-hop, before million-dollar studios and digital effects, sound came from survival. From kids who couldn't afford instruments but refused to stay quiet. Rhythm was created with hands, feet, and breath. Creativity filled the gaps left by poverty. Out of that world came something raw and unforgettable. A voice that could replace a drum machine. A bass so deep it felt physical. A sound that made crowds lean forward in disbelief. For a brief moment in history, that voice carried an entire movement into the mainstream. But fame has a way of speeding time up. It takes years to build something real, and only moments to lose control of it. This is not just a story about music. It's a story about what happens after the applause fades, about what the world remembers, and what it quietly leaves behind. Before the fame, before the stages and cameras, he was just a kid growing up in Brooklyn. Born on June 10, 1967, in South Carolina, his life quickly shifted north. Brooklyn became home, a place where space was tight, options were limited, and kids learned early how to entertain themselves. Streets doubled as playgrounds. Basements became rehearsal rooms. Dreams had to compete with reality every single day. Like many boys in the neighborhood, his first dream wasn't music. It was football. He spent long afternoons throwing passes, imagining stadium lights and cheering crowds. Prince Marky D and Kool Rock-Ski were right there with him. They lived on the same block. They grew up together. Friendship came before ambition. But time has a way of narrowing choices. As they got older, it became clear that professional sports were slipping out of reach. What didn't fade was the sound around them. Hip-hop was forming in real time. DJs setting up equipment at block parties. MCs battling on street corners. Music wasn't polished yet. It was raw, immediate, alive. That's when something unexpected started happening. One afternoon, they heard him make a sound that didn't fit anything they knew. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a trick. It was rhythm. Heavy, controlled, powerful, coming straight from his chest and mouth. The bass felt like it belonged to a machine, not a human being. They stopped and listened. From that moment on, the group changed. When they needed a beat, he didn't look for a record. He became the record. When energy dropped, his voice lifted it back up. They started gathering at his place, partly because he had DJ equipment, but mostly because that's where the magic happened. Prince Marky D and Kool Rock-Ski focused on lyrics. He focused on sound. Night after night, he pushed his voice further, experimenting, strengthening, shaping something no one had shown him how to do. People noticed. Talent shows turned into wins. Basement parties grew crowded. Word traveled fast in Brooklyn, and soon their name carried weight before they ever touched a studio. At first, they called themselves the Hypnotized Five. Then Disco 3. Names changed, but the core stayed the same. 3 kids. No money. No instruments. Just belief. Then came the night at Disco Fever in the Bronx. They arrived without plans to perform. No backing track. No preparation. But when opportunity appeared, they stepped forward. With nothing but confidence and breath, he filled the room. And in that moment, a future no one could have predicted began to unfold. After Disco Fever, nothing felt slow anymore. What had started as curiosity turned into momentum. Calls came in. Meetings followed. Doors opened that had never been visible before. For 3 young men who had grown up watching opportunity pass them by, everything suddenly arrived at once. The group was signed. But before the music could even find its audience, they were given something else. An identity. A name that stuck whether they liked it or not. The Fat Boys. It sounded playful, marketable, easy to remember. And at first, it worked. In 1984, their debut album dropped, and the response was immediate. People connected with the sound because it felt different, honest, unpolished in the best way. Songs like Jailhouse Rap and Can You Feel It brought energy and humor at a time when hip-hop was still defining itself. But one track stood apart. Stick M. No instruments. No studio tricks. Just breath, rhythm, and control. When listeners realized the beat wasn't coming from a machine, the reaction was disbelief. That song didn't just introduce beatboxing to the mainstream. It validated it. Suddenly, What had once been considered a street trick became an art form, and he became its face. Crowds didn't just listen. They watched. They leaned in. They waited for that bass to drop, knowing it came from a human voice. Overnight, he went from being part of a group to being a cultural phenomenon. The industry took notice. Tours followed. Fresh Fest packed venues across the country. MTV opened its doors, making the Fat Boys only the second rap act to appear on the network. Commercials came next. Pepsi, Swatch. Faces once known only in Brooklyn were now everywhere. Hollywood wanted in too. They appeared in Crush Groove, adding humor and warmth to a film centered on hip-hop's rise. Audiences loved them. That success led to something unprecedented. A major studio offered a 3-movie deal. Soon after, they starred in Disorderlies, becoming the first hip-hop group to headline their own film. For a moment, it felt unstoppable. Albums went gold. One went platinum. Their music crossed borders, finding success overseas, especially in the UK. They weren't just rappers anymore. They were entertainers, symbols of a lighter side of hip-hop. But behind the scenes, the pace was relentless. Shows, travel, expectations, appearances. The fun never stopped, even when their bodies and minds needed rest. There was no time to slow down and ask what this level of fame required. The world celebrated the sound. The image sold well. And quietly, the space between who he was and what he represented began to widen. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything collapsed. Instead, it arrived quietly, one decision at a time, one compromise after another. The culture around them was changing, and so was the industry that once embraced them. By the late 1980s, hip-hop had grown sharper, darker, more aggressive. The humor and warmth that once made the Fat Boys stand out were now seen as outdated. What once felt refreshing was suddenly labeled soft. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. Their management leaned harder into the image. The name wasn't just branding anymore. It became a requirement. Staying big wasn't a joke. It was expected. Conversations about health were secondary to maintaining the look that sold records and tickets. Tension followed. Prince Marky D questioned the direction. He wanted growth, change, a future beyond novelty. Speaking up made him a problem. Decisions were made without him, and before the public even realized it, he was gone. The group fractured. What happened next revealed more than any interview ever could. After Prince Marky D left, he struggled. Money dried up. Stability disappeared. That's when Buffy showed up quietly. No spotlight. No announcement. Just food. And cash. Enough to survive. Enough to remind him that loyalty still existed beneath the business. But the damage couldn't be undone. As a duo, the remaining members tried to move forward. New music was released, but the momentum was gone. At the same time, legal trouble pulled Buffy further away from the spotlight. He was charged in a case involving minors, accused of recording something he should never have been part of. The consequences followed quickly. Fines, probation, reputation damage. He stepped back. Without touring, without movement, without routine, his world shrank. Days blurred together. Food replaced motion. Silence replaced crowds. The stage that once kept him active was gone, and without it, his health declined rapidly. Friends watched him disappear behind closed doors. There were plans for a reunion, interest from major names, a chance to reclaim something that felt lost. He tried to lose weight. Others succeeded. But for him, the struggle was deeper than appearance. It was emotional, physical, psychological. The spotlight had moved on, and without it, he was left carrying years of pressure alone. When he passed away, the world did not stop. There were no days of national mourning, no extended media coverage. The news appeared briefly, then disappeared beneath newer headlines. For a culture that moves fast, loss often feels temporary. But among those who lived through hip-hop's early years, the reaction was different. In America, many fans felt a quiet sadness rather than shock. His music had already faded from radio rotation, but the memories hadn't. People remembered where they were when they first heard that sound. The bass made only with breath. The moment they realized a human voice could replace a drum machine. For older listeners, his story felt familiar. A young artist lifted quickly, celebrated loudly, then left behind just as fast. Not because the talent disappeared, but because the industry's attention did. Outside the United States, the memory lingered longer. In the UK and parts of Europe, where the Fat Boys had chart success, DJs continued spinning their records. Beatboxing evolved into competitive art forms. Vocal percussion became global. Younger performers studied the technique without knowing the name behind its mainstream breakthrough. In time, hip-hop historians began reconnecting the dots. They talked about early innovation, about how beatboxing wasn't just a gimmick, but a foundation, about how humor once had a place alongside storytelling and grit, and about how certain pioneers were pushed aside when trends shifted. There was also reflection, questions about responsibility, about how artists were marketed, about what happens when bodies are treated as part of a brand, about how success can isolate people rather than protect them. His story didn't end in scandal or redemption. It ended quietly, and maybe that is why it still matters. Because it reminds us that not every loss is loud. Not every legacy is properly honored in its time. And not every voice that changes culture gets the chance to grow old with it. On December 10th, 1995, his journey ended in silence. He had been home, recovering from the flu, practicing, creating rhythm the same way he always had, turning breath into sound. When he stood up, his body gave out. His heart failed. By the time help arrived, it was too late. He was only 28 years old, an age when most people are still learning who they are, an age far too young to carry the weight of a legacy. There was no final performance, no farewell moment, just the sudden realization that one of hip-hop's earliest innovators was gone, quietly, without ceremony. And yet, his influence never left. Every time a beatboxer steps on stage, every time a voice replaces a machine, every moment rhythm is created from nothing but air and imagination, his presence can still be felt. Long before technology made music accessible, he showed the world that creativity didn't require permission or equipment. He helped take hip-hop from the streets into the mainstream. He made people laugh. He made people listen. He reminded audiences that joy once had a place in the culture. But his story also carries a deeper truth. Fame does not protect the body. Success does not heal the mind. And when an industry values an image more than a human being, the consequences often come quietly, away from the spotlight. The music world moves fast. New sounds replace old ones. Names fade. But some contributions are too important to disappear completely. His voice changed what was possible. His sound helped shape a movement. And his story reminds us to look beyond the applause. If this story brought back memories for you, or made you think about an artist who mattered in your life, take a moment and share that below. These reflections matter, because behind every sound that changed culture, there was once a person trying to be heard. And some voices deserve to be remembered with care.